We're going to go ahead and call this meeting to order, a special meeting to discuss tuition and fees for the upcoming school year. I really appreciate all of you being here virtually. I know it's a big part of your day, and thank you for finding the time to not only be here today, but reviewing the materials that you've received recently regarding tuition and fees. But I did want to step back and just take a moment to honor one of our colleagues, our former colleagues. Rachel Folks passed away recently, and she was such an asset to our community and to our university. As I learned more about Rachel in discussing her with her family and for others who knew her, it didn't surprise me to learn that she actually started out in her high school days as a cheerleader, because she was a cheerleader her entire life for so many in our community. She was a school teacher, and she had done some work with special education kids. She was the founder, one of the founders of the Southwestern Virginia Higher Education Center. That has made a huge impact on with regard to higher education in Southwest Virginia. And in speaking with people, it was clear that almost everything in her community she touched in one way or another. And as she was with us as a board member, she really made things happen, and she had a deep understanding of how to make things happen and what things were important. And so she sat with us on the board, and I was fortunate enough to have her in my class. And so I was able to work with her for quite a while. And she will be sorely missed by this board and by the community. And the wealth of information and knowledge that she had will leave a huge hole for us. So I just wanted to take a few moments to honor Rachel in this meeting.
Madam Rector.
Yes.
If I could just share a few words in addition to what you said about Rachel. I think learning more about her myself, for those of us on the board, she represents the best of what we're striving for. The first woman in her family to pursue higher education. And as you mentioned, all the lives that through that experience and her, all the lives that she touched as a teacher and as an advocate for higher education. And I would argue that there was no one around the table who was a stronger advocate for students. And she always brought it back to students. And one of the conversations we had at our last time together was she was talking about being a member of her church's handbell choir. And I love handbell choirs. I rarely get to see one. And I thought it was so cool that she was a member. And she said that she hated to miss a practice because when one person is out, it messes up the whole choir. And so when I learned that she had passed, I kept thinking about that because it was right before Holy Week and they had been planning and preparing a number of performances. And I was just thinking about how much her choir was going to miss her. And just as a symbol of how much the community is going to miss her, and certainly the board. So I appreciate your words. And I think, thank you for letting me share a little more.
Oh, it was a beautiful contribution. Thank you very much, Jennifer. So we'll just take a few moments. I am going to end the moment of silence with some news that we will be starting a scholarship in honor of Rachel with the support of her family. And you'll hear more about that as we go forward. But I'm looking forward to enabling Rachel to continue to touch higher education and the students in this area for many, many years to come. So moving on to our business of the day. This is always one of the most difficult, if not the most difficult and challenging times for us as a board, where we have to look at our budget and ensure that anything we do that impacts the students in terms of a financial burden is really critically viewed and and really critiqued to the fullest so that we make the best decisions for the university while still enabling our students to gain that education. It's always very hard, and it always comes with mixed feelings for all of us, because none of us want to have any kind of undue burden on our students. And I'm sure that all the other board members as well really feel like if we could provide education at this level with this quality to all students for free, we would all do it. And I'm sure that we would find broad support. Unfortunately, that's not the reality. So here we are today. I did want to mention that prior to this meeting, we had a public comment opportunity on April 14th. We were here in person, hoping that we would have some public comments. We didn't have anyone sign up to have any comments. We received no written comments. And I just wanted you all to know that we have yet to hear any comments from students directly. And so I just wanted to make sure that you knew that there haven't been any issues that we haven't addressed yet with regard to public comment and student comments as well. So going forward, we're going to turn the meeting over to Rob Huver, our CFO, to give us an overview of the slide set that you all received and is available online. So without further ado.
Thank you, Rector McMahon. And I appreciate the opportunity to share the recommendations from Radford University for the tuition and fees going into the 2023-24 academic year. Before we get into the specific recommendations, I would like to provide a few comments just about the context that we share, the considerations that we include in these decisions, and very much in line with some of the comments already stated about our focus on maintaining affordability and high quality of academic instruction and programs for students. So with that in mind, many things are priorities for us as we go through this exercise. But a few I'd like to highlight, and the very first one is our commitment to affordability. Radford University is one of the most affordable options in the higher ed landscape, and certainly within the state of the Commonwealth. We intend to maintain that position as an affordable option. So as we go through this exercise, we look very closely at how we're able to leverage our resources that are available to us to provide the best services possible, the best academic programs possible, and support our faculty and staff who primarily are here for the students as well. So that's number one primary priority that we put in place. We also consider emerging student needs and demands and where the direction of the university should be headed to respond to those. We know those are shifting, have shifted. We've seen a lot of environmental changes that result in those shifting demands. And those could be around service offerings such as mental health and growth of student success opportunities, and could be facilities related to student opportunities. So there's a range of needs and demands that drive the decisions that we have. Then we also look to sound financial planning. And in previous meetings, we discussed some of the items that we look at. So I won't go into a great amount of detail on all of these, but we do look at the economic outlook, not only for the state, but regionally and across the country as well. We know that inflation is still an issue. There are inflationary pressures that exist, and we look to mitigate those where possible by leveraging funding availability that we have. We know it's subsiding, but it still exists, and that pressure persists for in a lot of ways across the expense lines and responsibilities that we have as a university. We also look at legislative actions and what's coming from the state legislature in terms of Commonwealth actions. We, as I think everyone knows, do not know what those are yet, but we do know there are amendments outstanding to last year's budget that was proposed. So we will be considering those and mention some of those as we go through the specifics about the budget development. We also look at programmatic priorities. We're closing out and coming to the end of a 5-year strategic plan that was put in place in 2018. And we are in 2023, the end of that 5-year plan. We're transitioning to accelerated plans that still speak to many of the very same themes. Most of them are centered primarily around students and what the university can and does provide to students. So we consider those in all the decisions, not only budget resources, but look at where we can provide savings as well and set priorities along the way. Then mandatory cost increases, a little less fun to talk about, but those are just increases related to contractual obligations and increases that are carried year over year out of our control. And then enrollment projections. We had a pretty in-depth conversation previously about not just the impact of enrollment in terms of total headcount, but how that mix of student population and the shift that is existing impacts the budget. And in terms of enrollment for undergrad students, graduate programs, as well as accelerated programs, that mix of students translates to a mix in revenue sources, some to our benefit, some not so much to our benefit. So we do consider that as well as we move through our budget considerations. Just a little bit about the students, the population that we're focused on today. For some of the undergraduate student demographics are available here. 91% of our students are in-state. 62% are eligible for financial aid. This relates to need-based financial aid. 52% come from low to mid-income level families. 35% are Pell recipients. 32% are first generation. And 24% have fully met need. I think this speaks a lot to not only our efforts to remain affordable, but it's our effort to serve a student population that I think is also unique in the Commonwealth as well. And we have the resources and ability to serve those students well, and we take that into consideration as we develop our budget projections. I put this slide up here. Those in the room probably can't read it, but this is just a brief description. We've gone through this again, but a brief description of pending legislative actions. We put this up here just to share that we have gone into this budget proposal fairly conservatively because we don't know the outcome of these legislative actions. And we'll know more, of course, as those decisions are made. But for the purposes of today and this budget, we have tried to be as conservative as possible in terms of estimating the impact on our expense budgets and what revenue sources might be available for funding. Speaking to our goal to continue to be an affordable option within the Commonwealth, this chart we put together just to show over the last 10 years how we compare. So the red line that you see increasing between 2012 and 2023 is the Radford University tuition, room and board cost. The blue line is the average cost of four-year Virginia public institutions. These are Chev numbers, Chev provided numbers. You can see in the chart to the far right where we stand in rank from highest cost to lowest cost. We, again, just to reemphasize, continue to be an affordable institution among the other institutions within the state. So as we go into the budget, into the tuition and fee proposal, I did want to speak a little bit just as a refresher about where we see our allocations landing in terms of revenue and expense projections for the budget and impact to the budget before we talk about the actual recommendations. This too has been discussed previously in detail, but I do want to hit several highlights. On the revenue side, these are estimates of the resource allocation for the FY24 budget. You'll see the first line addresses tech talent. That's actually a loss in revenue that is attributed to a tech talent program that was purposed to attract more computer science majors. And primarily because of the pandemic and other factors, it was not able to be implemented the way that had originally been planned. So we did see a decrease in revenue from that change in programming. So we've included that for the FY24 budget. You also see a line here related to the compensation adjustment or salary increase for faculty and staff. Right now, the proposal, as you saw on the previous slide from the state, is a 5% increase. There are 2 amendments pending that would increase it to 7%. And this would be the amount of funding we receive from the state for that purpose. The other line just includes fringe, central system upgrades, improvements, et cetera, that we receive funding for as well. Non-general fund changes. The first line is probably the biggest priority to discuss and account for in our budget projections. But this is indicating the accounting for the enrollment alignment as we continue to see primarily our on-campus undergraduate student population decline. This accounts for projections that were put in place I think 2-3 years ago that show us continuing to decline into FY24 before leveling off after that year. So this reflects a decrease in student headcount and the associated cost of $5.2 million or associated loss of revenue. The tuition rate change right now is the line to be further discussed today of additional revenue coming from any additional increases in tuition as we discuss later. Tuition alignment actually is addressing some of our accelerated programs that were not budgeted for originally. So this is new to the budget, not new programming, but new to the budget, and we have written it in for the FY24 year as well. So moving to the expense side, you can see related to some of that activity on the revenue side, you can see the cost of a 7% salary increase across the university at $6.4 million with related adjunct pay and fringe benefits listed as well. For central cost commitments, we have promotion and tenure expectations. We expect that every year. We have a line here for competitive wage. Many of you know, all of you probably know, that we are in the middle of a compensation study at the university. It's really intended to look at our pay bands and pay and wages across faculty and staff. We anticipate that we will have some realignments and necessary adjustments there to make. And that's a key piece of retaining personnel and to be a place that values their faculty and staff as much as we do. We really believe this is an important priority. And we have a placeholder here knowing that the compensation study will probably lead to several adjustments required across the faculty and staff. The others are new facilities, operation and maintenance related to employee tuition waivers, et cetera, for non-discretionary expense line of just under $9.7 million. And we have division commitments, discretionary lines, including academic affairs. These expenses are related again to the accelerated programs that we mentioned. It ties back to the revenue line that we saw on the previous slide. And then other necessary increases in expense related, some to personnel, some to operations. One I will point out specifically is in student affairs. And this is really related to meeting demands and needs of students around counseling services and increasing efforts around mental health and well-being. So we believe that's a priority increase here in our division commitments. So the total expenditure change is just under $12.3 million. One of the activities that was underway when I arrived here and had already made quite a bit of progress was an attempt to identify specific saving strategies across the university. And the vice presidents were each asked to go to the areas and look at their operations, their personnel, their budgets, and find places that we felt we could really realize savings that would help us continue and combat the continual increases in inflationary pressures that we're feeling. And in my opinion, coming in new, I feel like they put forth a sincere effort and did a really good job of finding those areas and identifying savings. The total amount of these saving strategies is just over $9.2 million that came from all areas across the university, including academic affairs. This includes $2 million of faculty early retirement program funds, additional savings from the tech talent program that I mentioned before, and then savings in operational areas, including central resources, which this is not only from wage and staff adjustments and salary adjustments, but also from adjusting things like our contingency rate, where we've been able to successfully come in underneath previous projections in previous years, and we're able to make adjustments here moving forward that we think are sound as well. So the saving strategies totaling almost $9.3 million leaves a base budget increase of only $3 million, which I don't take that lightly, and think as a new person here, think that's outstanding that we've taken that step to contribute to the bottom line of the university. So with that, I will move into the tuition and fee rate proposal. And I want to give at first just an overview of the entire slate of recommendations, and then we'll go into each individually in more detail moving forward. But our recommendations for the academic year 23-24 tuition and fee includes an increase of 3% in undergraduate in-state and out-of-state tuition, increase of 3% for graduate in-state and out-of-state tuition, an increase in the technology fee of $1 per credit or $24 flat rate. We're recommending no changes to the competency-based education and accelerated programs. We're recommending a comprehensive fee increase of 2.75%. That's in support of auxiliary services. We'll talk in more detail about that. And then we are recommending revitalized board rates and realigned roommates that I think we'll all be excited about being able to offer new changed programming in those areas. So taking each of these one by one, we'll look at undergraduate tuition first. And you can see the 3% increase in in-state and out-of-state translates to a $245 increase for in-state undergraduate tuition to a new proposed tuition of $8,401. Out-of-state undergraduate increase by dollar amount would be $607 for a new tuition rate of $20,853. And that translates to part-time credit hour per credit hour tuition of $349 for undergraduate in-state and $868 for out-of-state undergraduate. For graduate tuition, we are proposing an increase of $275 for in-state graduate students. That tuition amount is $9,457. For out-of-state graduate students, the increase would be $539 for a total tuition of $18,503. And then the per credit hour rate is $394 for in-state and $770 for out-of-state main campus, $394 for out-of-state RUC students. The next is our technology fee. The technology fee supports the technology services that are required for students to have the technology services that support not only classroom instruction through emerging classroom technologies, but network infrastructure, incremental costs of the enterprise system dedicated to students, et cetera. We're recommending an increase of the technology fee to $120. That's a dollar change of $24 or per credit hour of $1, increasing from $4 to $5. Auxiliary mandatory comprehensive fees. This fee is actually in support of some of our most important programming opportunities that we are able to offer students. Auxiliary services are required to be self-supporting. So one of the important considerations in the setting of the comprehensive fee and what we'll talk about later in the room and board fees is a balanced auxiliary budget. And we believe that between these recommendations that in 2 years we can have a balanced auxiliary budget, which is again a requirement. I'm not going to go into detail on all of these items that included, but that are included on these next two slides. But I did want them to be here for you all to see the variety of opportunities that we support for students through the comp fee. Not only that, but I think as you go through the list, you'll notice that some of these are offered to students at no cost because of the comp fee that we charge. And I think that's important because it levels the access that students have to many of these services. And so as we talk about being an affordable institution, the accessibility of services being the same for all students is really an important piece of this. So you can see athletics, building facilities, debt service to some of those building and facilities and construction projects, recreation, student activities, student health, as previously mentioned, is an important one as we look to be able to support students' mental health, physical health, and well-being through counseling services, and accessibility services and items related to those. So on the next slide, well, I'll fast forward through that. On this slide, you can see the array of the comprehensive fee here and how we distribute that among many of the initiatives that we have. Athletics, just under 40% is the largest. And then if you look at the student-facing, student-oriented services between student union, transportation, student health, student activities, that's approximately 40% as well. So another large portion goes to all the student-related auxiliaries, and debt service, auxiliary support, and building and facilities is the remaining portion of that. The recommendation is that we increase this comprehensive fee modestly to $3,765. Total dollar change is $101. The credit hour rate would increase from $30 to $40, noting a $10 increase there. Room and board fees is next, and I want to give a little context here because they're based on a lot of student feedback and interaction with the student experience. A group of a lot of our staff worked really hard on developing new proposals for student room and board fees. The feedback from students indicated that the structure was complicated. It was hard to navigate how to select which program was best for them. It gave too many options with the intent of being flexible, but it actually resulted in not being flexible. Students didn't understand it. And then we wanted improved access and flexibility among all of those plans. So the group that did all the work to respond to that student feedback came back with recommendations that are intended to simplify the structure, make the selection process easier to understand, and easier for students to navigate in terms of what's best for them and their particular needs. And then also we looked at balancing the auxiliary budget across these two enterprises over the next 2 years. So that is incorporated in some of the fee adjustments as well. So the goals of the team that really did all of this work were to streamline the options, simplify the structure, address student demand, and that has shifted, especially in the area of dining. As you can imagine, the dining options and choices that are out there are growing exponentially and continue to incorporate technology, et cetera. And so it was that was a big part of the goal, the plan as well, enhance flexibility and be more inclusive within our rates. So just to give you, we've talked about this before too at a previous meeting, but to give you an idea of the change and what we're talking about, how we're simplifying, this is current state. You can see a number of plans available here, 7 plans that primarily focus on the dining room opportunity, a declining balance in the first 2 flex plans, et cetera, with pricing related to that. Some of the issues were students running out of money at the end of the year, not having the opportunity to access dining at all because, whether they should have been rationing or budgeting is a whole nother conversation, but the plan did not allow for that flexibility and use for the student to maximize their meals throughout the entire semester and academic year. So the new plan put forward, the proposal, is that we move to a more simple model with 4 plans at different levels that allow for access throughout the entire semester or academic year and includes options for commuter students as well. And so at different price points, they have different amounts of food dollars and different access to dining hall or retail options. One of the bigger changes, the option between dining or retail options, and the retail option at the cost of $9.25 per meal is how we're allowing students to have access to those options the entire semester. Then moving to the same thing for current state of residential halls, to the same goal was to simplify. The room structure is so complex, it takes 2 slides to present. Is that a?
George, did you have a question or? Perhaps.
So looking at current state, there were a lot of different price points here. And as you can see, we go from traditional, and then we differentiate between phase 1 and phase 2, and then the number of occupancy in each room. So there are different price points, different reasons why someone, or different rationale behind those different price points. And then also on main campus apartments, some were with laundry, some were without laundry. So with all of these options, there were well over 20 to select from, with 20 different and in excess of 20 different rates. So after studying and looking at student feedback, the proposed structure is simplified greatly. We are recommending that residence halls, we have Muse priced at a single unit at $7,300 for the year. A double would be $5,300. All other would be at these price points here on this slide: single, double, and suite. And then university apartments would include a single rate and a multiple occupancy rate, and all would have laundry folded in, laundry and access to other services to equalize the level of service that all residents have across each of these options. You can see the RUC option also is reduced to 2 choices: single at $10,500, multiple occupancy at $8,500. So all that to say, I think you can just tell as we click through that this is a much simpler choice for students. It will allow them to make more effective decisions based on what's best for them. It is how I will note that it is hard to compare last year and previous years, last 10 years to this year. So we don't actually look at one single room compared to another and are able to give a percentage increase. But we do think as some of these rates are below what a student might have been paying prior, some of these are above. We think we landed at a really fair spot that does not put undue burden on the student in any of these choices. So then to conclude, the proposed rates with all of that information, the proposed rates for our undergraduate in-state population with some assumptions about dining choices and residence halls, et cetera, include a proposed FY24 tuition of $8,401, an increased mandatory technology fee, $120, mandatory comprehensive fee, $3,765, room, assuming dorm double occupancy, $6,450, and board residential plan, $5,114, for a total cost for an in-state undergraduate student of $23,850, with a dollar increase, $1,438. I do want to add here that we do really anticipate increased financial aid that is coming in from the state of $8 million, over $8 million, to be substantial in assisting students who, especially high need students, as we look to increase what we feel are necessary costs, eliminating as much unnecessary costs as possible. We are aware that the additional financial aid will go a long way in relieving the burden that students might feel because of any increase at all. So we're pleased that that additional funding will be available. That will open for discussion.
Great. So now we do have an opportunity for questions of Rob and comments. So happy to answer any questions or address any issues.
I have a question.
Okay.
For the housing, the university housing, which presumably is like successive years beyond freshman year. Sorry, I've got a dog barking. Is that pricing competitive with off-campus housing? Assuming we want that to be a revenue stream or to be a really solid choice for students. And that's just more of a curiosity thing. Because there's so much housing around the campus that is not owned by the university. Are those prices competitive?
Yeah, I think there were market comparisons in the proposal that were completed by the work group, and they determined we are competitive with what's around us in the adjacent markets. Yes.
Thank you.
So George's here. George?
Hi, sorry, I'm having technology problems. So I have to call in by phone. I do have a few questions, but one of the ones I do want to get out is last year, the board had approved an increase to tuition about 3%. I think it was right underneath that. And we provided a one-time in-state undergrad student scholarship. I believe it was to just in-state undergrads. How does that compare to this presentation? Because certainly increasing it from the rate, shows a $246 increase in cost, but in reality, there's a $250 increase that was previously subsidized by a scholarship. So how does that calculate in this increase that we're looking at for the families that are going to have to pay the new tuition for the upcoming year?
So the proposal that we have today is 3% over last year's tuition rate. So it includes that, and this year does not include subsidy or funding for that, but we do know there's going to be a substantial increase in state funded financial assistance, and that 100% of that will go towards meeting needs of students that this rate would apply to. So it is over last year's rate and not the rate 2 years ago.
That's a really important point, George. Thank you for bringing that up. You had other, I think you're muted, George.
I'm sorry, I just said I'll defer to others while I try to figure out the technology here. Sorry.
Okay. Do others have questions?
Rob, I had a question about early in the first set of slides, you talked about tuition alignment. And I think you characterized it as it wasn't anything new, but it had not previously been budgeted. I just was looking for clarification on that.
Yeah, sorry, it is newer. It's not new to this year though, if that makes it. So it's growth in accelerated programs, which in fact, it's the fast track program, which was previously unbudgeted.
Okay, thank you.
Tyler?
Thank you, Madam Rector. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Did have a couple of questions. I did just want to follow up on the point that George made about the 3% increase on paper this year, and that being based off of last year's rate, not the 21-22 rate. So would the out-of-pocket effect of this 3% increase that's proposed right now be in actuality about a 6% increase from 21-22?
For tuition, yeah, we had
Okay.
2.96 last year and 3% this year, so just under the
And-
realized net.
Okay, thank you.
If that's- yeah.
Thank you, Madam Rector. And then the additional state-funded financial assistance that was referenced, the current proposal does not take any of that into effect because I assume we don't know exactly what that's going to look like until an amended budget is adopted, correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Exactly right.
And then finally, one last question about the scholarship that was provided last year to offset the passing on of any cost to students and families. Has there been much discussion around potentially looking at doing that again this year, whether in full or in part, with the 3% increase from the 0% base?
So
Go ahead.
it has been discussed, and as you can imagine, providing one-time funding like that year over year just would not be sustainable, for one thing. But we also are really, I mentioned the $8 million increase, or more than $8 million in financial aid that's coming from the state. We're really considering that and the potential that the average financial aid award is going to increase fairly significantly for next year. And so it's not the same as subsidizing across the board, but it is providing where we think funding will be needed for the individual students and families that fall into those categories. We think that will be more than sufficient to cover the increase.
In addition, I think I'd like to just go ahead and add that, we've had much discussion about, the different models that would allow us to have 3% more, less, and what that would do. And I think that one of the things that the president and Rob have done is really look at those expenses. And I just want to reiterate that what was shared, the $9 million will be cut this year over last year. So we've tried to look at both sides, knowing that enrollment has not grown, that we need to really find ways to cut to minimize the increase in tuition. So that's something too that, when we talk about 3% this year, 3% last year, the reality is that we really, our budget required that 2.96, and it was quite a crunch and a pinch to provide the scholarships that we did and that other universities did across the state. And I think that as Rob points out, I think that we put ourselves, I think, in a dangerous position if that unsustainable strategy is put in place. But it's a really important point to bring up and question to ask, and things that we've considered. And some of you have brought some of those questions previously to me and to the president. And so I just want to make sure that you all know that we've considered those, looked at them, and tried to find ways that we can offset. And I feel like we've trimmed as much fat as we can. Bob, did you want to?
No, I just want to state the obvious. It's very hard to go through this process for any college or university when we do not know yet what the state's going to do. It just complicates it greatly. I would also, as one board member, just remind everybody, we essentially have not raised tuition for over 4 years, and we can attempt to cut all we want. I just don't think it's sustainable or realistic. And I think this effort to include all the cuts and other things we've identified is a reasonable approach. And I'm hopeful, which we've already stated, that if further monies come from the state, we can use that money to do something similar to that we did last year. So that's the intent. Okay, and that's my reaction to to what we're looking at today.
Yeah, certainly to restate, I think that we're all very anxious to see what the final state budget will look like, because we certainly, if we're able to include more dollars in our budget from the state, that gives us a lot more opportunity to go back and revise our the tuition increase that will be needed. So that would be wonderful if we could get additional dollars. That would be fantastic.
Madam Rector,
Yes.
good afternoon. It's good to see everybody. Wish we were together. I always hate this meeting. It's the one meeting of the year that I absolutely dread because of the tough decisions we have to make. So I thank Rob for the work that you and your team put into this. I know it's not easy. I have a question, but before I do that, I just want to make one comment. And I think those that have served with me know that this is something that you've heard this before, but maybe I've shared it in a different way. When we go through this decision process, for me, I jump back to when I was an undergrad. And for somebody who had to take loans and work my way through college, I know how hard it is for any increase for tuition and fees. And because I lived it, I know what it was like. So I just hope everybody, and I don't think anybody makes these decisions lightly, but I wanted to say that just to feel better, if nothing else. One thing that complicates it for us that maybe isn't true universally with the other publics in Virginia is that we do not have the research overhead dollars available that are a revenue stream of any robust manner that would allow us to reallocate some funds to help subsidize what we might have to do with with our tuition and fee decisions. So we don't have all the tools available that maybe some of the other publics here and in other states may have. Which makes the job even tougher for Rob and his team and the president when you're making these decisions. So I just wanted, for our newer members particularly, I just wanted to make that point. Going back early in the slide deck, and I guess I'm really just wanting to make sure I'm on base with this. Under the revenue slide, Rob, that you had, we had the enrollment alignment reduction of 5.2 million. As I understand it, part of the reason that number is as big as it is when you have a decline in enrollment year after year, it's not just a one-time hit on your budget. It's baked into those numbers that you have to carry forward for at least 4 years, sometimes maybe longer. And so in a way, it compounds itself because it's not something that's a one and done budget impact. And for enrollment declines 3 years ago, we're still feeling the financial effects of that. 2 years ago, the same. Am I understanding that correctly, or am I misinformed or misinterpreting what that means?
You're exactly right, Mark. It not only that, but it crosses populations as well. And it's not just an incoming freshman, it's retention as well. We've had those conversations as well. So if you're correct, it can compound across the years.
I think it's another example of why stabilizing things on the enrollment side, whether they're freshman enrollment or retention of whatever year. And I'm glad to hear that we feel like that's stabilizing and will be going forward. That'll help that number eventually reduce and disappear, hopefully.
George, you've had the hand up on the screen for a while, and I know Lisa has a question too. Do you want to go ahead and ask another question now, or?
Lisa can go ahead. I'm sorry.
Okay, no worries. Okay.
No,
Lisa?
mine was from earlier, so I'm good.
Okay.
Well, then I guess I'll go. So if you don't mind, I have about 4 questions I'd just like to get clarity on from the briefing. You mentioned that the financial aid that we are anticipating, which right now I believe is around $8 million, is not incorporated into the numbers here. However, we've incorporated I think it was a $3.6 million increase to support the 7% change. Is there a reason why we don't account for a portion of that $8 million in financial aid that could also reduce the need to increase tuition?
And so the $8 million is in here.
Okay.
Sorry, go, Stephanie, you want to answer?
So the additional $8 million is strictly for need-based.
That was Stephanie Janelle. She's got.
Hold on for just a moment.
Yeah.
So just to clarify, the additional $8 million is strictly for general fund need-based financial aid. And the resource allocation schedule that we've shown is our general E&G revenue. So it's actually a separate pot of money that comes in separate from the state. It's not general revenue that offsets your operations. It has to be spent directly on financial aid.
Yeah, so, but it is in our assumptions. It's not on this schedule, right? Yes.
Okay. So, but at the end of the day, it is a revenue source. Am I understanding that correctly?
Allocated directly to students in financial aid. Yes.
Okay. So some portion of that is already accounted for. Because I was looking at I don't know the slide number. It was the resource allocation revenue. Is that part of the tuition realignment line item by any chance?
No, the tuition alignment is strictly related to the fast track and building that into the budget. Are you asking about the $8 million?
Yes.
So that's not on this schedule. But that isn't, we are anticipating having that available for student financial aid.
So as opposed to having it as a pass-through, we have it as a separate.
It's a separate pot of
It
money.
goes straight to the student as opposed to coming through our financials and going to the student. Is that what you're saying?
Right.
Okay.
Correct.
Does that make sense? So you don't see it in these slides, and that number is not used to calculate what you've seen in these slides and the final numbers.
Okay. So in execution, so on July 1, there's some portion of the students that are eligible for that scholarship. Will that then become a revenue source that could be seen as excess revenue if our net expenses?
Has to be used for need-based financial aid.
It's packaged in their financial aid package. So the student sees it as an award that strictly hits their account personally.
Right. So it doesn't go towards tuition and fees.
Correct. Well,
For the student.
For the student, it does.
yes.
We'll have, with that $8 million, we'll have $24 million.
Right.
To spread across through need-based aid that goes individual, that reduces the student's amount of tuition, room and board that they actually pay. It's part of their financial aid award package.
Okay. So what am I, so if I'm hearing correctly, that would go towards paying for some of the E&G costs that are related specifically to that student. So doesn't that make it a revenue source?
I think that what I was trying to say is that, because it serves as a pass-through, we don't take that in as part of our revenue. That goes, go ahead, Stephanie. No, I'll have Stephanie.
Laura, do you want to talk about the accounting of?
I would just say that that's built into our enrollment assumptions. So that depending on how many students we have, that's part of the tuition and fees that's built into the PowerPoint presentation that you saw. That's the tuition and fee revenue that we get. And then students that actually come and attend here can get funding to pay those tuition and fees. So they get the funding. We don't actually get the funding until the students actually come here. And then, so it's two different pots of money. We don't get to pay ourselves with that tuition and fees until the students come here and then they attend. So if we only have 5,000 students, then, and that's all we're accounting for in our resource allocation, and that's all the money we're going to get, regardless of whether there's $8 million or whatever. We're only going to get the 5,000 students.
Okay. I get it, and I really appreciate the academic exercise here. I just wanted to understand: is it an element of revenue, because you see it on one slide, but you don't see it in another, and I wanted clarity there. So thank you for that. One of the things that we had talked about, my second question, has been the excess capacity with our residence halls. And if I'm reading correctly, I believe part of what we're trying to offer is an incentive to perhaps change up, maybe get single rooms instead of double rooms as because of the excess capacity. But I believe we also have excess capacity in terms of university apartments. So this increase in the room costs that we've laid out in the various options here, how does that address some of that excess capacity? In other words, are we seeing an increase in cost because there's some unutilized capacity here that, there's just a fixed cost to maintaining empty apartments, for example?
So I don't think there is excess capacity in university apartments, first of all, is that correct?
That's right.
Yeah. But and I'll let you can chime in too, but as far as excess capacity goes, right? We have a lot of renovations on schedule too. So excess capacity is, I guess, relative, because we're going to be doing some shifting that will allow us over the next few years, perform renovations, make adjustments to the housing inventory in general. So we are monitoring that, but I don't know that we have as much excess capacity as you might think, but I will hand it over to the experts.
Well, and just one other note is that we touched on in the last presentation, and Rob touched on it briefly too, is part of the housing rate changes is also getting rid of the delineation between laundry and no laundry. And so there's typically historically been about a $390 differential for units that have laundry built into the facility. And so what we're doing is taking away any additional out-of-pocket charges for students to do laundry and including that into the rate, whether you're in the apartment, whether you're in a traditional residence hall. And so that speaks to some of the change in rate for the traditional residence halls as well. But Kendall can speak to, we actually have very high demand for our apartments, and we're even able to leverage those for some of our upperclassmen as well.
Okay, well, simplifying it for students at the end of the day, I think is always good. So I appreciate that. On the same lines of the auxiliary, it is my understanding that the 7% increase, assuming it is passed, would also flow down to employees that are funded out of the auxiliary. Is that 100% cost that the institution has to cover as part of the auxiliary budget?
Correct. Yes.
So in the event they approve a 5% increase, there could be savings in the auxiliary budget.
That's possible. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Correct.
Okay. And then I think this is my last question. And when there's time, I'd like to, I guess, wrap up my full position on things. But the total expenditures of 12 million, the change that we're talking about, when we say it's a change, I'm curious, at our last board meeting in March, we approved, I believe it was a $3 million increase in some of our operating costs, and I had articulated, those would be one-time kind of costs. Is this 12 million inclusive of that 3 million, or is it part of the original budget that was passed last year? So I'm trying to figure out, where does that 3 million that we had approved at the last board meeting align to this 12 million?
This includes all increases going into FY24.
Okay. So
anything that we saw previously might have been adjusted, but it would be incorporated into this now.
Okay.
So that's what you're asking? Sorry.
I'm more trying to ask where the baseline budget is. What is our starting point to get to the 12 million differential? Does it include that 3 million or not from March?
The budget adjustment?
Yes.
Okay. Is it from the adjusted budget or from the original?
Most of the adjustment was related to the accelerated.
Get up so that they can see you and hear you better.
Most of the adjustment from before was related to the accelerated program, so we're building in here.
Okay, thank you. So, Madam Director, I'll give it back if there's other questions, but I like to eventually wrap up.
While we're here, George, it's really important for you to have these are great questions. So please don't, if you have additional ones, please don't hesitate. And the same for all others. So if you have other additional questions.
If I could, there was a series of questions from, I think Jennifer started with it, but George, you followed up, and somebody else mentioned it as well, about the AP programs. Let me just describe very briefly what they are. AP is a kind of an external company that works with universities. We call them fast track programs. These are 7-week programs. They're kind of taught on top of our regular schedule. So we've got our MBA program and 2 other programs with them. So their commitment, the university signed a contract with them a couple of years ago, and their commitment is to grow the programs. They do a lot of the enrollment management side, a lot of the admissions side, but ultimately they receive 50% of the tuition back for their efforts. So the AP, for I guess whatever reason, weren't necessarily baked into this budget, but they are a university program. So this reflects that income, but also I believe the money that's going back to them as well as an expense. So those, again, for whatever reason, those weren't here before, but those programs have been showing some growth. So it is important to include them in the budget. So anyways, that's just the background for those, if that's helpful.
So Jay, I see you have a question.
Yes, thank you, Madam Rector. Real quick question for staff. As I was listening to the presentation, understand that through a combination of revenue enhancements, some expenditure reductions and increases, that we're going to have a total base budget increase of about $3,044,000. Am I correct in that assessment?
Yes.
How much of a total percentage increase is that $3 million relative to our total operating budget?
Total operating is approximately $250 million, including auxiliary. Just D&G is about 158 million.
So we
Less than 2%.
Less than 2%.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Good question. Lisa, you still have your hand up, and so do you, Mark. I just want to make sure that those were the previous requests for questions.
Yeah, it's funny. I don't see it on my side. I don't see my hand up either.
There's a bug with the Zoom in here, so we call it ghost hands during our meetings, but it's always good to check. Just
want to make sure.
George's hand did just go up
Yeah,
though.
we're going back to like waving of the arms. So.
Yeah. So I had a question on the slide of the assumptions for enrollment. Obviously, that drives the potential for revenue generation. What is our assumption for 2024? And I know I think deposit deadline is Monday, so I don't want to preempt some things, but the revenue assumption that came in for this year, I mean, it was much more favorable than we had anticipated, and so I'm just curious.
So the data that was used to build this was an estimate of down 390 students for next year.
So that would be down from where we started this year?
Correct. So that's, I don't know if you remember that Excel model that we kind of walked through at the last board meeting, made a couple of assumptions, but that's really the number that it had projected based on the comment that I think Mark had made earlier. When you have these changes in enrollment, they roll forward for several years. So when we have decreased freshman class size, that rolls forward for 4 years in our budget. So those projections are based on that roll forward.
It's actually 360.
Oh, 360 students down.
Okay.
Number of enrollment, not new students.
Correct. Total enrolled students.
Correct.
If we keep talking about it, we just gained 30 students. It'll get better. So.
Wishful thinking, Mark. Georgianne, did you have a question? I think your pen is in front of the camera, and I couldn't tell whether or not you were waving or if it was the pen.
Yes, it is my pen. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions, George?
Well, I guess I've had all my questions asked, and I appreciate the additional information. I like to at least share from a discussion perspective and for other members of the board to consider. Let me first start with, I am very impressed with the amount of work that the university has done to be able to lay out a number of cost savings opportunities. While I recognize some of them have been pre-planned, in advance with particularly, I think the workforce transition program for some of our tenured faculty members. There was still clearly a lot of work done. And so, that was something that was very important to me, that, if you're going to ask for more money, it's very important to me that we see where we're making reductions to try to offset that. And recognizing that there are going to be times that sometimes when the numbers add up, we're still at a point where do we take a risk? And as a state institution, that's perhaps not something you would do because businesses would do that. You can make mid-year changes. You can't really upset the apple cart here, once you establish the tuition to all of a sudden make a reversal, in 6 months. So I appreciate all the work that's done. I appreciate the clarification that's been provided. I, as a parent, tuition is very important. That increased costs at a time where perhaps pay raises are not matching some of the inflationary costs is affecting many of the families. And while the middle class families may be very well impacted, definitely the working class families are even worse off being impacted by the inflationary costs. And when we consider the kind of student population we have, and while it might only look like it's $240 or $246 increase just for tuition, when you consider the housing costs, the food costs, everything, this is not just a small increase for an in-state student who perhaps could have in the lower range of those wages, being severely impacted, that an assessment of maybe not going to school and going to a community college to continue to get your credit becomes the option. I recognize that, until the General Assembly acts, we really don't know if we need to raise the additional $3 million to be able to sustain our operations. But coming from the feedback that I get to understand what it really costs to operate the university, but then what it costs families to afford education, I feel that this is a significant increase, a net increase for families of Virginia. And it may or may not be the good time, but right now, this is where we're looking for, what have we been doing historically to try to assess what are we going to do going forward with these increases. The university, over the last 7 years has seen about a $20 million increase in E&G support from the state collectively, right? So every year it had been going up. The financial aid, while it's not part of our revenue source, certainly has been there to help some of the students that need it. And while I recognize sometimes being at the bottom or low towards the bottom, when you look at the average cost of education, is maybe that's not where we want to be. Collectively, when you look at the region, you look at UNC, the schools in North Carolina, the schools in West Virginia, we tend to be, not as towards the bottom. And so in all that, I feel that the university has seen a decline in enrollment, has seen an increased funding from the state. While certainly the state still not contributing its policy goal of 67% for in-state students, dollar-wise, there has been an increased support on a per student basis at the university. And now we're also going to move forward and continue to increase, the tuition, room and board fees. And so it's very personal to me that some of these changes, while it's a few $100 for tuition, when you look at the cost of living, $1,000 for room and board increases just seems excessive for some of the students. And so as members of the board consider, your position, I would say that I would be supportive of a tuition increase that looks at where we were in 2021 and 2022 and increases it 3% from that point, which I recognize is essentially the scholarship, that one-time scholarship we provided, but that's where I would support it. The room and board, I just believe it's excessive and, would welcome an opportunity to see what can be done. But given where we are timeline-wise, I don't think it's possible. So, Madam Rector, members of the board, I'm willing to entertain more conversation to see what we can do to try to alter some of these things, recognizing the challenges it's going to face. But if that's not an opportunity, I just want to convey that I can't support the net increases on everything that's available here. I think it's just not the best time for a state institution to be able to see that. But I recognize the economic forces that's facing us is causing us to pause. And given where we are and the unknowns, I feel that there's still an opportunity to try to avoid some of these cost increases and consider the fact that asking someone who makes $40,000 a year to pay $1,000 more just for room and board just seems very excessive at a time that you can't even compare the cost of eggs like it used to be, that you start wondering, what happened to that dozen and a half eggs? Why does it now just cost a dozen? Or it's the same price for a dozen. So that's what I like to offer for consideration of members of the board. And like I said, if there's an opportunity to continue to reassess some of these fine points, I'm willing to certainly reconsider my position. But at this time, I'm just sharing with everyone that I can't support an increase.
Well, thank you very much for sharing that, George. It's really important to hear that perspective. And as I've gone through the same exercise, one of the things that I think was compelling is hearing the data related to inflation being between 19 and 21% over the past 5 years, and that public universities are 13% or less in terms of how much we are charging for public education. So, and I have to say, I think it's actually a better delta than when you look at eggs. Boy, that's really been painful. But your position is very well respected and very well thought out, and I really appreciate what you're saying. I do, however, feel that, and I would love for others to chime in as well about your sentiments, but I find it very difficult to conceive of a way that we can move forward without increasing costs when costs are increasing that we are paying. This is not just for us to make things more comfortable. It's allowing us to keep our students where they need to be successful. And I don't see this as having a lot of superfluous monies in it. I feel like this is what we need to do in order to maintain our level of education and making sure that our students are successful. So as I've thought about this, as I said, I really respect your opinion. I really respect that you're sharing and you're being so upfront and frank about it. It's really important to have these conversations and to make all of us think really critically about each line item on this budget. So, Bob.
Now, I would only add that all those reasons, George, are the same reasons the rest of us agonize over this every year, right? We're all concerned about them. On the other hand, I think we've worked very hard over a period of time to keep, our cost to our students reasonable, and that, for all the reasons we've already discussed. The only other point I would make is we're looking at frontline tuition charges, costs. Very few students actually pay that amount of money. We sit here and debate about the front line, but we work also very hard to provide scholarships and other, to me, it's sort of unfortunate we have to do it that way, but that's the entire system. But very few of our students are paying those frontline prices too. I just want you to factor that in. Appreciate your comments though, George.
Jimmy? I think you're muted. There.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So I would like to make my position, let you know where I stand as well. And I support what George has said and where he stands. Again, I think I look at the economic background of our students and the families of our students. And I think that with what they're going through now, as George has pointed out, it is a time of suffering. And again, I believe with the increases that have been requested, I think we as a university are better. We're in a better position to absorb those and find ways to do what we need to do rather than put any more burden on the families. And I would also say that I don't know what we've really thought about, how this impacts our current students.
Lost you.
Jimmy, we've lost you, or you're going in and out. Why don't we? Jimmy, could you repeat what you said over the last 10 or 15 seconds, because you had cut out on us? So.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I'm just concerned about the impact that this is going to have on our students, the economic position our students are in, families are in. And I think that we as a university, even though it's going to require us to find places to cut. I think we're in a much better position to do that at this point in time, rather than put any more burden on students or our family. Thank you.
And could you clarify what your position is? Because as I understand it, George is saying that he does not agree with the 3% increase for the 2023-24 year. Is that, George, is that correct? Well,
yes, that's correct. That's correct.
Okay. So Jimmy, is that what you're saying? Did we lose him again?
Yeah. See if anybody else has something.
Yeah, in the interim, until we get Jimmy back, would anyone else like to speak? Marquette, did you have your hand up? Okay.
I am back if anybody can hear me. All right.
Yes.
I'm not
hear you.
I'm not sure what you did not hear. What you did hear, I'm sorry. It's just that I'm traveling.
Yeah, it's all great. We're glad you're here, even if it's only intermittently. So I had said to clarify, George's position was that he is not willing to support the 3% increase for the 2023-2024 academic year. And I just wanted to make sure that that's what we were hearing from you.
That is correct.
Okay.
It is. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Are there other?
Well, we bring it to a head and vote on it.
Tyler.
Thank you, Madam Rector. Yes, I'll just associate my comments with George and Jimmy, and I want to be respectful of everybody's time, so I won't rehash everything. But I do have some discomfort with the totality of the increase as it's been proposed today, and just being mindful of the challenging environment that everybody is in right now, and realizing that we have cost pressures coming in from every single angle. That's not lost on me. I do think it's important to note the significant increase in support that the Commonwealth has contributed to the university in recent years, and that's a good thing. And I'm really optimistic that we're going to be able to add to that in this amended budget cycle that we're currently working through. And hopefully, when push comes to shove, that a good chunk of this increase is actually mitigated by additional financial assistance that we receive from the state. However, I guess I would like to see perhaps some expanded conversation around revisiting another credit to some extent in what we did last year. I realized that, we called it a one-time credit last year, and we have to be careful about getting into a recurring situation, and that's not lost on me either. But I do have concern about passing on these increases to students and families at what is going to be really a 6% tuition increase from the 21 budget cycle. So in closing, I'll just associate my comments with George and Jimmy, and that is my position. I'm hopeful that once the budget is complete at the state level, that it's a bit sunnier than it might be right now. But really appreciate the work that has gone into this. I know it's not easy, and respect the position of every board member here and the consideration that they give to this decision. I know there's not one of us that takes it lightly. So appreciate everybody for your consideration.
Absolutely. Georgianne?
Yes, I just wondered if George was willing to would be amenable to 2% for this year instead of 3%. Or is he saying no increase, period?
Well, I guess, Georgianne, as a point of discussion, because the scholarship is not reoccurring for last school year or the current school year, I view it that the students are going to already experience a 3% increase for this year. So I am supportive of that lapsing and occurring and moving, and because we don't want to get into that continuous one-time scholarships. And so for that reason, I can't support an additional 3% for the upcoming school year. It's let's hold firm with what was decided on before, allow those costs to go through, and leave tuition unchanged. But the other concern I had, Georgianne, is the fact that room and board, food and housing costs are going up substantially, and that just makes the tuition increase, more of a decision on it to be, not comfortable for me. Now, if we were in a position where we voted on each thing separately, the tuition and fees in one bucket and room and board in another, I guess for me, I'd say no to both. But if members of the board are considerate that maybe you would support one or the other, then I'd be supportive of amending any action to look at it in separate elements. But I'm looking at the totality, Georgianne. It's over $1,000 more for an in-state student to come to school here. And last I checked, subsidized loans are not increasing by the federal government. And we'd have to rely on a combination of the state and the Pell Grants just to offset some of these costs. And I'm pretty convinced that some of it is going to come from their pockets. It's just a bad time.
Okay, so in that, I will go along with George and Jimmy and Tyler.
Saying no, go ahead.
It seems to me if we start gaining the tuition and fees at this particular meeting, a lot of work has gone into the budget itself. Anything we do like this needs to be studied through the budget process and what it does to the university. And I would prefer, I'm going to make a motion that we approve the presented budget, fee, tuition and fees, and then we can debate it and take a vote. And then, take action based on that vote. Otherwise, I think we'll be here debating this for the next 2 hours. And it's more complicated than just us at this particular meeting say it needs to be 1%, 2%, or whatever. So I move that the board consider the following resolution. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Radford University Board of Visitors approves tuition and fees for the 23-24 academic year as reflected in the summary of proposed 2023-24 tuition and fees beginning with the fall 2023 semester and thereafter until otherwise adjusted by the Board of Visitors.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor of accepting or for discussion? We're opening it for discussion. Is there any discussion about the resolution? One thing I'll say is that, from my perspective, I think it's really difficult to kind of mesh the theoretical with the realistic. It's really difficult to say, yeah, we're going to, keep tuition at 0% when our costs are actually going up. So, the numbers just don't work, despite the fact that we really, in our heart of hearts, in our minds, we want this to be something that is much more affordable to students. And we are constantly working that, but the bottom line is the numbers just don't add up for us. And I think that, perhaps one of the things that we need to add to that resolution is that we will put it in the resolution that we will be going back and reviewing the budget based on the final state budget that is approved, so that we have some leeway if we're able to change those numbers based on what we're able to get from the state. I really respect what Rob and the president and the entire team have done to trim as much fat from our budget as possible. And I don't think that $9 million is any slouch number. And I think it's pretty admirable that they've gotten to that point. So, in my mind, as somebody who has been a business person, a community person, a person in higher education, someone who's gone through and gotten a graduate degree, cost increase. I remember, being a grad student, costs increase. And it is just, it's one of those unfortunate parts of life and higher education that we can't change. It's kind of getting, I don't see how we make it work if we're not able to accommodate a tuition increase at this point. Further, when I look around at the environment, I feel like we must be doing something right. If we can actually limit our tuition increase to 3%, when we see what some of the other the other public education institutions around the Commonwealth have done. And the fact that we can keep it at that level is pretty darn impressive in my book. So those are my comments related to discussion, and I'm happy to, we can have more. Marquette, then Lisa.
Yeah, I was gonna ask my mom for a bigger hand for Christmas.
Sorry about that, Marquette.
It's all good. So so I guess I guess the question that I have, because I'm kind of torn, and when the picture's been getting painted here in terms of working class family, and I like most on this call who attended Radford or perhaps other universities, I fell into that same category. While I wasn't the first in my family to go to college, I did make it through loans and grants, and having to work my entire time at Radford. So I can definitely sympathize with every dollar counts. The question that I have is I don't have a clear understanding in terms of what the alternatives of not doing this are. Like, so for example, I hear George and others joining on with George's original statement, so I can appreciate voting or not voting for the 3%. So say, for example, if we don't vote for the 3%, what are the ramifications to the university? Because one of the things that's really important to me is the number, but I don't think we can blindly say yes or no without having a full understanding of the ripple effect of either accepting or not accepting. And right now, I don't know the ripple effect of not accepting what's being proposed.
Yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah, so it depends on which category you're looking at. But for example, if we just isolate the 3% for an in-state undergraduate, the impact to the university would be slightly under $1 million in revenue that is passed on. So those dollars support operations that exist in the E&G, which directly support the student experience and the classroom instruction. So faculty, staff salaries, operating expenses related to student programming, et cetera. So I don't know if you're asking dollar amount, Marquette, or the actual item, but that kind of gives you a ballpark.
Yeah, so I'm being a little bit more targeted, right? So, although we're not at the voting stage, others have, posed their vote for what George has proposed. I want us to be very direct in terms of if we take the path that George is proposing and others are signing up for, does that mean less classes? Does that mean layoffs? Does that mean closing down buildings? What does that mean? I'm trying to get it, or does that mean going to a different pot of money that we said we weren't going to go to and drawing down? I'm trying to get very, very specific versus philosophical.
I think Bob made a good point. I think that's the exercise we would have in front of us. I don't know if we could, I don't know if Brett, you want to address that, but it could be a combination of all of those things. I mean, some of the savings reductions, for example, looked at places like vacancies of personnel lines that we were able to get rid of and cut from the budget. Might be more of those available to us. We might have to stretch in finding additional savings, et cetera. So it could be a combination of those things. I don't know. I don't feel like I'm prepared today to answer exactly what all of those would do. To the comp fee, if we don't go that route, then that continues all the advantages that we are saying we would get from the gain, the additional services included. And I get the dollar amount increase seems large, but in terms of additional services that we're able to provide, a more simplified structure and the benefits to the students, what we give up is the response to the student that, yes, we hear you, we want to make these changes, and this is what we're going to provide for you, and then continuing deficit in auxiliaries if we do not make that move. So the list is, it just depends on what the final decision is, and then we'd have to make adjustments accordingly.
I would just say that personally, I just don't feel comfortable making a no-go decision without knowing what the downstream, the negative ripple effects could be. I appreciate the work's been done on the presentation. So I get what's being presented, and I get the whys and on that side, but I also see, that as we head down the path of, picking a no-go decision, we should also be extremely aware of what the negative ramifications could be, because this could boil down to a cutting your nose off to spite your face, right? Nonetheless, it is a tough decision, but we need to understand, we will look like heroes if we say, okay, no increase, right, as being proposed here. But will we do that if we also, end up laying off X% of the staff? We actually end up, closing down buildings if we take away certain offerings, looking like a hero on one side, and then, on the other side, causing a negative rep to different set of families could come into play here. So I'm gonna leave it at that. So just to say, I'd rather have some perspective on, the other side of the coin on this.
I'll give an explicit example of a challenge. I think to the point is, if these changes aren't, supported, then we'd have to go back and look to see how to do this specifically. But an example of our classified staff at the university, 25% of our current positions are open. If you think about that impact on our campus, I've heard from many different offices that the workload is unsustainable on the remaining people, and they are unfortunately looking for other opportunities because it's too much work here, because we can't fill some of those positions. The 7% is helpful, but that doesn't get us even close to market. Now, we're doing a market survey, but we are way off of market where we need to be. So, part of the allocation that's here, just as an example, is we've put, I think in the budget, a $1.8 million allocation towards trying to get those classified staff salaries aligned. While it's not the right answer, if we don't have a tuition increase, remember that's a legacy issue. That's an item that may suffer, and staff have absolutely essential functions for supporting students. So you start making choices. There's just tough choices all around. Well, we could, I guess we could put a prioritized list of those together should this not happen. It's just tough. It is challenging. That's an example. I mean, I think on the board side, I guess cheaper food plans could come up with for students, but the difficulty that we've had is students are running out of food at the end of the semester and they're not eating well. And that is not good for our students. So again, there are ways of doing it. I think that most of them they're just not great choices to look at.
They're like Band-Aids to kick the can down the road. So, well, I mean, I would.
I think Lisa has her hand up, Madam Rector.
Lisa?
Yes, if I could just add a little here. And Dr. Brett, you brought up what I was going to question about the salary discrepancy between our support. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, between the support staff at Radford University and some of the other places. So what I would say is that I want us to think long and hard about what this means in terms of the quality of what we offer to our students if we do not do this. We have been known as an institution that is just stellar in terms of their faculty and staff supporting students. My feeling is these are hard decisions, and I don't want, and I think you all have done a fantastic job coming up with that 9 million cut where we can. but any deeper than that is going to impact what we have to offer here at Radford. And we're not in a place with enrollment where we want to back off on our investment in the university. So my feeling is when I look at where this, the tuition is for Radford University, we've done a fantastic job keeping it really, really affordable. But these are tough times on top of COVID and where we are in higher education. We have found ourselves in a little bit more of a pickle with enrollment, and even with the tuition raise and the comp fees, we are still incredibly affordable, and we cannot afford to take anything away from the quality of what we're offering our students at the university. So that's my position, and thank you.
Yeah, I'll also chime in that, Marquette, I think your question is really spot on, being able to understand what the ripple effects are. But from my perspective, I know that mental health has been a real issue here and at other universities. And I think that is something that as we go forward would suffer. And that's just one example of smaller, not even smaller items. I mean, that's going to be something that has very serious ripple effects, not only financially, but overarching success of our students and their general well-being. But the faculty too, retention is really difficult, especially when you're at a university like this. And I think Lisa makes an important point that, our faculty are some of the most important people for the success of our students, probably the most important people. And we hear time and time again how important they have been as mentors to the students, and how much they mean to the university brand. So I don't think that we should underestimate that. Did you want to say something about?
I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Oh, but those are again, I think that we don't want to put ourselves in a position where we are able to increase enrollment, but we actually don't have the capacity to actually accommodate all that, the students we have coming in at the same level in terms of quality as we go forward. I think that if we are starting to degrade what we offer to our students, we're on a slippery downward slope. And I think it's going to be really difficult to reverse the spin and start moving up again. Bob.
Now, the only thing I will add is I just want to remind everybody we have a new administration here. We've had some problems over a number of years that we've talked about repeatedly, resulting in enrollment. Things have to change, and they are changing. But we're going to need the resources to do that, including marketing. 25% of our we have 25% of our staff on campus vacant because we can't be competitive to hire these people. You talk about impacting the quality for our students. I just don't think now's the time, after 4 years of not raising tuition, to not support the president and his staff and what they need to run this institution and improve it and make it better. So, I've been here 7 years. I have a lot of my time invested in this school too. I don't like to raise anything, but to start playing around at this late date with this budget is not the time. To pursue what George and everybody else has been talking about is spot on, but I don't think it's today. So this is my reaction to where we are, at this minute, and I hope you'll consider that.
Are there any other further comments?
Deb, if I may, just I guess as a final rebuttal, I think what Jay had asked earlier was what is the net percentage impact of this increase when you consider the overall operational budget of the university? And I think the message there is that it is a minimal percentage, as a change. And so while we collectively can say $3 million is a lot more money we need for, to raise tuition at $2 million and really close the gap on the, the room and board aspects of it to get the net operation budget to be $3 million. I think that as the nation is looking for family, or families are looking to the nation to try to figure out how to solve the inflationary crisis we're in, everybody is making sacrifices. It is a bad time for everybody. And I don't want to misconstrue that my lack of support for these increases means I don't support the administration or Dr. Danilovich. I absolutely support their efforts. I actually support the fact that we should have been seeing tuition increases all these years, because to hold it flat was just, not realistic for that amount of time. But the declines in enrollment has severely impacted our offerings. And we've never had that conversation as to, well, what does it mean now for all of us? And I think over the next, as we have our retreat and in the next year, with President Danilovich's support and leadership, we can assess what does the future hold. But we're at that point where I think I like to ask for some of those sacrifices, right, to go in it with the many families that are here, and look at other means. And look, at the end of the day, I'm hopeful that the results, that when we come into a board meeting and say enrollment actually was higher than our projections, it resolves the situation we're in, that the state looks at it and provides additional contributions to help close this gap. But I recognize on May 1st, parents want to know what are they paying, and that's why we have to make a decision. So I think to what Jay had said earlier, the percentage in total is not a lot, but I look at it on a per student basis, and it is a lot. So I thank you. This was a great conversation, but I do want to just assert the fact that, Mr. President, I'm still supportive of you. I just think that right now, this is, I'm asking that we look at what sacrifices can we make to mitigate the impact. It is a relatively small amount. I get it, you got all the other cuts you're making, but I'm asking just for a little bit more while the country hopefully recovers from this inflationary situation, and that we can get back to, as I said earlier, paying for a dozen half eggs the way we used to.
Well, I think that, from my perspective, I really do think that the fact that we're able to increase our opportunities to provide scholarships, I think that's going to make a meaningful impact too. So I do feel like it's going to mitigate any increase in tuition that we make. And I think that should be something that we all consider when we look at, should we do this or not? Because we do have an opportunity as we go into the next year to consider what we want tuition to look like and how we reshape things accordingly. And what the trends are, because I think that that's all we can use right now is what are the trends. And we do have a new administration, and I feel very hopeful that we'll start seeing some trends that are in a positive direction. So is that a hand up, Marquette? No. Mark?
A couple of comments. I want to make sure everybody pays attention to the last sentence in the resolution, because it does give me a little bit of comfort, and that is that we're making a decision today, but we do have the ability to adjust if the General Assembly provides more money, or if we see some other things that aren't materializing the way that we're planning. The president and his team need something to build on to go forward, and some plan, some financial plan that they can operate under. We have the ability, it may not be me because it may be you guys after June 30th, making whatever adjustments may occur. So we do have some flexibility there if we have more revenue buckets coming in than what we see right now. So I just want to emphasize that point. The other, which, and I think for George and Tyler and Jennifer, now you know why we hate this meeting, because it is a tough decision. And for me, I've had to go through this meeting now for the 8th time, and they're really hard meetings and hard decisions because they do have an impact. But I do take a little bit of comfort in the fact that even with what we're going to be doing, if you look at where we rank among the schools in Virginia that we're competing with, and I heard you about West Virginia, North Carolina, Good luck to a Virginia student trying to get in UNC right now. I'll leave that at that because they're so heavy on in-state students. But we're 13th out of 15 publics. And so maybe that doesn't give anybody comfort to compare to the others. But I do take a little bit of comfort in that even with what decisions we're having to make today, we're still going to be a very good value. And I think, frankly, one of the best values in Virginia, and we'll still have an exceptional product and experience that students have. The final thing I'll say, and this gets in specifically into the fee side of it with additional support for students on the behavioral health side. I'm not going to be one, and I'm willing to take criticism from anybody if we're making increases that are going to provide additional support for the students. And whether it's on the food side, whether it's on the behavioral health side with students counseling and support, I'm not going to be one that's unwilling to move in that direction to provide that additional support. And I just had to say that because everybody who's served with me on this board for a number of years knows that student behavioral health is at the very top of my priority list. And I just want to say that is because I do think that that's one of the areas that's going to benefit from this decision. So thank you, Madam Rector.
Absolutely. Any further comments? Oh, Jennifer.
Thank you. I've never raised my hand on Zoom before. So, I think that I very much appreciated this discussion and everyone's input. And I agree with kind of all of it, honestly. I have so much admiration for President Danilovich and you, Rob, just coming on and kind of stepping into this challenge and this opportunity. But I think about the responsibility that we as a board have to the Commonwealth. And I look that 91% of our students are in state. And, as a Virginia, lifelong resident, as someone who went to college in Virginia, very close to Radford, it's been always clear to me that Radford has a very unique place in Virginia. And I think, we can talk about other state institutions, but Radford is its own gym and it plays its own role. And in many ways, it's difficult to compare to other institutions because of research and a myriad of other characteristics. I look at that more than a third of the students qualify for Pell Grants. That is significant. And, early in the year, there was some discussion about, what does tuition say to a prospective student or a prospective family? Is it appealing if you have low tuition, or do you think that you're getting what you're paying for? And I have to say that when you look at our student body, I think that's very appealing to have a low tuition rate. And I have to associate myself with the part of George's remarks that when you look at college, especially for first-time college students, $300 is a lot, $200 is a lot, $1,600 for a room and boarding. That is a lot of money. And it already feels like a lot when you're looking at tens of thousands of dollars, chunks of money that are new, right? I mean, if you have a graduating senior, this is a new expense on the bottom line. And, I come from a part of the state where I can assure you that salaries are not keeping up with inflation. And I know that this is why this is a problem for the university. The university is in that same boat. The people who work at the university are in the same boat. I understand all that, but I just can't believe that right now is a good time to put that burden on, again, looking at this demographic, the people that we want to attract, the people that we want to improve enrollment. We want more people to look at Radford. We want people to look at Virginia Tech and say, that's too expensive. I'm going to go to Radford because I'm going to get a first-class education and it's going to be slightly less expensive in a part of Virginia that's, a great place to go to college. So that's where I stand. I just don't think that I can support this time. Again, have the most support for the administration and I respect everyone's opinion on the board. But those are my thoughts.
I think that very important comments and well taken as well. Any other comments, other folks that I have missed?
So I just have a question. So getting back to Mark's comment about the last sentence or two, so when does that drive us making a yes/no decision? I know this is today's vote, I assume, is to continue the work that's already been done, but when will we reconvene to say yes or no?
We have a meeting in June that we could do that. And certainly we could circulate information and materials prior to that. And I guess we're anticipating that the final state budget would come out around June 20th-ish, maybe, kind of, sort of, maybe not quite then. Tyler, you're not being very helpful there.
Well, the problem, I think, is our students and families need to know what our tuition rates are. Right?
If I could, I think financial aid packages are due May 1st. So that's when we have to submit those to students. So you build it around the cost that's out there. So that's the difficulty. It's not, again, not that anything can't be revisited, but the students are going to have this financial aid package built around whatever that's set at.
That's interesting because, yeah, I guess if I were a parent, it'd be, yeah. Yeah, the unfortunate truth is college is just so expensive, period, across the board. It's one of the most expensive endeavors we'll do, that is, that we pay for. So, I mean, I think all the points that have been made today have been really important and need to be heard. I think that we need to go ahead and vote and see where we are. Excuse me?
Yep, I agree.
Okay. Well,
roll call.
Yeah. Karen,
You ready for that?
yeah.
Dr. Brown?
Hold on. Can I make sure that I'm clear that we are voting on the motion that was recommended by Bob and then seconded by myself, which is to accept the recommendations as presented by staff? I want to make sure that I'm clear.
Yes. And with the last sentence being proposed 2023 budget tuition fees beginning with the fall 2023 semester and thereafter until otherwise adjusted by the Board of Visitors.
Aye.
Mr. Archer?
Aye.
Mrs. Gilbert?
No.
Mr. Lawrence?
Yes.
Mr. Lester?
Respectfully, no.
Mr. Mendiola?
No.
Ms. Pompa?
Yes.
Mr. David Smith?
Yes.
Pull over.
Mr. Marquette Smith?
I'm stuck on this one. Is an option to abstain? Yes.
Well, I don't think abstain is yes. It means you're not going to vote.
No. I'm asking the yes.
Mike Mellis question.
Yeah. Mike, did you hear the question? We were asking whether or not is there an option to abstain?
He can abstain if he chooses to do so.
I choose to do so.
Ms. Snyder Falkingham?
You're on mute, Georgia.
George?
Sorry, no.
Ms. Throckmorton?
Yes.
Mr. Turk?
No.
Rector McMahon, sorry.
Yes.
You said yes?
I said yes.
The motion passed. 7-5.
Okay, the motion has passed 7-5. Other business that we need to discuss in this meeting today. Well, thank you all for the frank discussion, for bringing up all of these issues. I think we all sincerely hope that we have an opportunity to revisit this and make it less painful for our students. We would all feel great about that. And that's always something that we strive for. So thank you again very much for taking part today and for having a lively and frank conversation. I very much appreciate it. And also thank you very much for taking the time to really dive into these issues and our budget. I'm really thrilled that we have a board that is very informed and is so passionate about this. So thank you very much, and we are adjourned. Thanks all.
Thank you.